In this video I'm going to show you how I got from this drum sound to this. Right after the intro. Let's go. Hey all, thank you for stopping by for another video, and in today's video I'd like to show you what you can get out of your drum recording when you just record your drum set with 4 microphones in your rehearsal room. This is what I got here. I got that from a client to mix. They recorded themselves in their rehearsal room with just 4 microphones on the drum kit, one for the snare, one for the kick, and one for each side from the overheads. So a left overhead and a right overhead makes 4 microphones. Compared to a professional recording, to a professional drum kit recording where you have at least 11 microphones. Let's say you have 2 for the kick drum, 2 for the snare drum, 1 for each tom makes 3 microphones, 2 overheads, and at least 2 room mics, which are 11 microphones for a drum kit. And I guess the most self-recording independent artists don't have an interface with 11 or more inputs in their rehearsal room, but an interface with 4 inputs is absolutely affordable, and 4 microphones are affordable as well, just to record yourself a little bit. And this is how you can get a more or less proper drum sound with just 4 microphones. So let's go. So, and I'm going to start with the overheads, because of the overheads are the microphones which got the most information out of the drum kit, with all the cymbals and toms, and additionally I will bring in the kick and the snare microphone. So let's focus on the overheads only for the beginning. The overheads only sound like this. And first of all, I'm going to make sure that the phase alignment is correct. To find out if the phase alignment is correct, I'm bringing in EQ, which is focused on the snare body, and I will bring in a frequency analyzer. So what I'm going to do is I'll pick one of the overhead microphones, the right one, and I start to play around with the timing correction to a point where the snare body gets really present. Play the overheads. Now I'm focused on the snare body, which is around 100 or 200 hertz. And now listen to how the sound of the snare body changes when I play around with the timing. There it comes. And there it goes. So listen to the difference. I bring the timing back. Now there's almost no snare audible at this range, and I'll bring the timing back to -2.5 milliseconds. And there is its snare body. So this way we can align the phases of the left and the right overhead microphone, and I can show you what that means. Let's take this snare hit right here and zoom in a little bit. And then you see the timing. Here is the snare itself, the snare microphone itself. Then the left overhead is a little late, and the right overhead is even later. And with correcting this time alignment, I brought in the phases of both microphones together for a nice big snare, low end snare body tone. So and after that I will pan the overheads left and right. Now they're both at the center. Now I'll bring them left and right. So now listen what happens when I pan them hard left and hard right. Do you hear that? Bring them back together in the middle. So once again, now they're both in the center. And now listen to what happens with the snare when I bring the left and the right overhead microphones apart from each other and pan them hard left and hard right, and listen to what happens to the snare in the middle. So hear that? That snare is going from be exactly in the center, it's going wider and wider, and it's leaning on the left side a little bit. Therefore, I'm not going to pan them hard left and hard right. I'm only going the halfway, half left and half right. That way I can keep the snare in the middle and I get a little bit of a stereo feel also. So now I feel the right overhead is a little bit quieter than the left one. Therefore I will bring up the clip gain. Let's put in 1.5 dB on top. That's better. So next stop is I'll group the left and the right overheads in a dedicated overhead group track. It's a stereo track and it's rooted in the drum mix track, and I'll call that overhead mix. So now I'm going to bring in an EQ. One of my favorite plugins for things like this, or one of my favorite plugins in general, is the Chaps Omni channel from Waves. I will link that down in the description below where you can get this. It's one of my favorite plugins overall. It's one of my Lone Island plugins. And now I'm going to bring in a little bit of saturation on the overheads. Just to make them a little bit bigger. The next thing is I will bring in a low cut to cut all the low end rumble away that we don't need. So one of the things that I love about this plugin is when you bring in the low cut filter, it also can bring up the resonance frequencies a little bit. But for the overheads it's a little bit too much, so bring down the slope to a 12 decibel per octave. So the next thing is it feels a little bit, or it sounds a little bit boxy, let's say, a little bit boxy, a little bit, the room sound from the overheads is coming through a little bit too much. And therefore, if you're not sure where to find specific frequencies or where to cut or boost frequencies, I have made an EQ cheat sheet which looked like this, and I'll link that in the description down below as well, so you can download this one for free. So you got an overview of all these specific frequency ranges and where to find specific sounds like muddy sounds or boomy or muffled or harsh sounds. So on this one the snare overheads are a little bit muffled, I would say, in the mid-range. So you can also find the table here. Here are the overheads, and these are common frequencies as a starting point. When you want to change your sound a little bit with an equalizer, you can start at these frequencies and sweep up or down a little bit to find the sweet spot for your individual instrument. So in my case, I was looking for the overheads, and I have cut the low end already, and now I would search for 400 to 700 hertz because of the overhead sound a little bit boxy at the moment. So let's do that. I'll start at 500, bring that down. That's a little bit too much. Next, what you could do is bring up a little bit of the high-end brightness from above 12 kilohertz. Let's listen to what it sounds like. And when doing that too much, it's going to be a little bit too harsh, and therefore I would place a de-esser after the EQ, and I would push the equalizer into the de-esser. And now I got a little bit more of the brightness in the high end, but it's a little bit more controlled by the de-esser. So that sounds a little bit more pleasing than just pushing the brightness. So the next is I will bring in a compressor to control the dynamics a little bit more. Let's start with the default settings. Have you heard this? The tail of the snare is going to get a little bit longer when I bring in the compression. I'll do that again. Let's focus on the snare. Listen to what the snare is doing. And now it's pretty short. It's attack and poof on. Now the snare is instantly away. But now listen to what happens to the snare when I bring down the threshold of the compressor. The sustain of the snare gets a little bit longer, and that was what I was looking for. So now our overheads sound like this. It's a little bit too ringy, a little bit too much high end, and therefore I'm going to grab a tape emulation plugin. Let's take the Magneto. What the tape is usually doing, it's bringing up a little bit more of the low end, and it's rolling off a little bit of the high end, and especially rolling off some of the high end at the overheads is what I'm looking for. So the ringing and the harshness of the overhead sounds gets away a little bit. So now we got a pretty good overhead sound. And now I'm bringing in the kick and the snare. Let's start with the kick. Just listen to what happens when I bring in the kick as it is. So let's just switch the phase of the kick and listen to what happens. So that's not that big of a difference. Let's look at the meter. What happens when I switch the phase of the kick? Now the kick is peaking at about -40. And it's a little bit less when I switch the phase. So we'll go back to the original phases and keep that as it is. So next I'll bring in the Jabs Omni channel again for the kick. Add in some saturation as well. The saturation brings in some more harmonics to the original sound, to the original recording. And for example, the saturation or the additional harmonics are important when you have not the complete frequency range in your listening device. For example, if you listen to the music on a smartphone and you cut away the complete low end of the final song, your kick would be lost if there is not enough of the harmonics and the overtones. So therefore it helps to bring in some saturation to make your song translate better on different systems. It also brings in some more of that high end and some more of that pedal, of that snap attack. So next I'll cut the low end as well. And now listen to what happens with this specific plugin when I bring in the low cut filter and when I boost the resonance frequencies at the same time with a steep slope. It's a 24 dB per octave slope. And I can bring it up a little bit for you to hear that better what happens. So now I will play that kick together with the overheads, and I'll bring up the low cut filter and to listen to what happens when I cut the low end and boost the resonance frequencies at the same time. There it gets a nice impact in the low end. Low cut filter off and low cut filter on. I think it's a huge difference in the low end. So let's listen to the kick and solo. There's something in the kick that I don't like that much. So I would describe this kick sound as a little bit boomy, a little less attack, a little less high end. It's just a boomy low end rumble. So let's grab that EQ cheat sheet and find out what we can do. 150 to 350 when muddy. And I think that's it what we're looking for. So now it's getting a little bit clearer, a little bit more defined without that rumble and boxiness and muddiness. Turn the EQ off again to hear the difference. Now there's the wobbling low end rumble in the mid range and the lower mid range. So next thing, I will bring up the high end a little bit more to make sure that the kick will translate better in, as I said, on smaller listening devices, for example, or later in the mix, to make sure the kick can cut through pretty good. That's also depending on the song itself. The problem what we have here right now with focusing on the drums only is we have the drums without context. Now we can do everything what we want to the drums. We can make them punchy, we can make them cut through really good, but we don't have a context of that song, so we don't know what the song needs. But let's take a look. If I wouldn't know how to start or where to start with the kick drum, I would take my cheat sheet and I would look for some more slap in the kick, and the slap is usually from 2K to 4.5K and some more click and attack at about 8K. So let's start with the 2K to 4K area. Let's start with 3K and bring that up a little bit. Yes, that's what we're looking for. Let's bring in the overheads again. Don't EQ and don't focus too much on something in solo. Always listen to and EQ in the context. Now I want to bring in some more of the high end of the kick. It's a 8K and above. There's not that much information in that recording. We can bring it up, but nothing happens already. So maybe we could bring in a sample later if necessary. But let's leave that as it is for the moment. And let's compress the kick a little bit more. So we're getting closer to what I want it to be. Let's turn the Chaps Omni channel off for a moment. This is the original kick. And this is what the Chaps Omni channel does. Might be a little bit too much click sound for the context of a song. But for now and for that moment, I'll keep that as it is and go to the snare. Let's bring in the snare. Okay, I think the snare drum needs a little bit more power and a little bit more snack and punch and a little bit more of everything. So let's grab the channel strip again, and first of all bring in some more saturation. Let's make the snare drum a little bit bigger. So next up, let's cut the low end a little bit, and with a steep slope on this plugin to bring up the resonance frequency. There it comes. Bring it up a little bit more. Now the snare is getting some more of that punch in the body, you can already feel that in your chest when the body from the snare comes in, and this is what we're looking for. So now, although the snare sounds a little bit muddy and a little bit muffled, now if you don't know where to start, grab the EQ cheat sheet, and it's muffled and muddy in that area here from the low mids 250 to 500. It's that area. It's here at the snare 500 to 700 hertz, maybe a little bit lower. Let's try 500 and go down from there or up. So next I would love to get some more attack from the snare. Let's say at mid-range attack is by about 2.5K and 6 to 8K for more crack or snap. Let's start with 2.5K. Bring it up. And a little bit of 8K. And just a little bit more thump and a little bit more body. Bring the volume a little bit down. And control the dynamics with the compressor. Not too bad. Now let's go back to the kick. There is something with the kick that I would like to improve a little bit, and for the one thing I feel that there's a little bit too less low end, so I will bring in the thump. Better. So now let's turn the plugins off for a moment and listen to the difference. Bypass all plugins. This is a difference. This is the original recording without any processing. And now I bring in all the processing. So now we're going on to the drum mix bus, and on the drum mix bus I will bring in a compressor, and I like the DBX 160 for drum bus processing, and I would start with the master bus compression preset. I bypass the compressor and bring in the compressor. Almost a little bit too much. I bring in the compression a little, bring back the compression a little bit. I'll link the stereo channels, bringing that down to 1.5 instead of 2. So the problem is when you compress your drum mix bus a little bit too much. You get some crazy stuff going on in the cymbals, and most of the time I like to bring in some parallel compression for all snare, kick and toms, for example, but not for overheads and cymbal microphones. So I add another effects channel, and I'll go for a channel strip again. I can do that in mono because the parallel bus should only affect the kick and the snare. So let's call that drums parallel. And I will bring the snare and the kick to the drums parallel bus. And on this bus we really can drive that a little bit harder. With this parallel bus I'm going to add some dirt. I'm going to add some more saturation, almost some distortion and some more compression to bring in some dirt, which makes it a little bit more interesting and what helps to translate the drum kit better on smaller listening devices. This is obviously way too much, but it's a parallel bus, and so we can blend that parallel bus in with the original sound, and this is what we're going to do right now. Let's listen to the drums as we have processed them right now, and I'll bring in the parallel bus fader slowly to blend the dirt in a little bit. Might be a little bit too much of the distortion on the drums parallel bus. So I'm going to bring back the from crush to heavy. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So there's some kind of room resonance in the kick that I would like to get that rid of a little bit. That would depend on the song where that drum kit belongs to. But for now, let's take another EQ. Let's go with the Pro Q3, and I'll find that room rumble frequency in the kick drum. Can you hear that? I will solo the kick drum. I'll turn that EQ off and listen to what happens when I boost that and when I solo that frequency. Hear that in the background? And this is what I don't like at this track. So bring that down with a pretty narrow frequency band. Bring up the low end a little bit. Going to bring up the low end a little bit more. So now I feel like the kick has lost some body. The woo 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 is almost gone, but there's also some body missing. So bring in some body again, the 300 hertz area, I would say. Better. So bring down the snare. Feel the snare is a little bit too loud. So next, what we can do is we bring in some samples, as I said earlier, and therefore I'm going to take the Steven Slade trigger plugin, and I'm going to add some samples. I'm going to use the stock samples this plugin is coming with, and let's start with the kick drum. So now this plugin is firing up a sample every time it detects a kick sound happening. Every time the kick sound gets over a specific threshold, this plugin will fire up one of the 3 samples, or more or less, depending on how you set this up. And now set this to 100% wet and listen to these samples in solo. Solo the kick drum to make it better audible. So we have actually enough room sound in this original tone, so we don't need this sample. Let's listen to this one. This is what we're looking for, some more attack, and what this. It's a little bit room sound as well. Can bring that down a little bit, but bring up the attack. So now we blend that in. Let's turn that down, that mix knob, to 100% dry. And now I bring in that sample with a mix knob. And listen in the complete mix. And now we can do that same with the snare drum. Bringing in another instance of the trigger plugin, bringing in the snare samples, snare solo, samples and solo. Yes, this is what we're looking for. A nice punch and nice attack. This is in dry. Now bringing in the sample. That's actually a pretty good drum sound for what we have started with just one snare mic, was just one kick mic and 2 overheads. Everything else I would do with this drum sound would depend on the song it should be in. For example, the kick attack might be too much, might be too less, it depends on the song. Can now control that a little bit in the mid-range. Let's listen to what that kit sounds in the mid-range. So now I will show you what would happen if I turn off the trigger and if I would turn off the EQ we have set up at the beginning. So now we have no attack in the higher frequencies. And listen to what happens to the kick in the mid-range. Without processing and with processing. it translates better in the mid-range with the processing in the higher frequency area. Sometimes you need a gate on your tracks, sometimes you don't. Now in this case, for the snare, I would like to bring in a noise gate just to filter out all the background or the mic bleed. And I'll do the same thing with the kick, just to get rid of all that mic bleed, because the problem is that when you add compression, compression will bring up all that bleed, and it can cause some problems later on. So I would now insert another EQ on the drum mix bus just to get rid of some kind of that harshness in the high end. And let's try a Pultec EQ for this. So now let's compare what we got to what we were coming from. I have printed the original drums as we got them right in the beginning to compare them. Now let's listen to the original recordings without processing, how they sound. And now let's listen to what we got out of that. Original again. And processing. So this is just to show you what you can do with 4 microphones on your drum kit. As I said, everything else I would do to the drum kit would depend on the song itself and would depend on the context where the drum kit should be in. There might be some more, there might be the need of some more attack on the snare, for example, or some more or less low end in the kick drum, or some more or less high end in the overheads. That depends on the song itself, but this was just to show you what you can do with just 4 microphones in your rehearsal room on your drum kit. So I hope there was something in this video you found helpful, and I hope you get an idea of what you can do in your rehearsal room with just 4 microphones instead of, let's say, 10 microphones for professional drum recording. So if you would like to download the EQ cheat sheet that I've used here in this video, or if you would like to get your Chaps Omni channel, I will link that all down below in the description. And if you liked the video and if it could help you a little bit, just give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel just to get notified on more videos that coming up in the future. So far by now, have a great day. See you the next time. Ciao.